For nearly a decade, no American president has stepped into China, not during the trade war, not during the technology war, and not even during the growing military tensions over China and Taiwan, where US military support for Taipei continues to escalate tensions with Beijing. But now, after 9 years, President Donald Trump is visiting China. And the whole world is just wondering, why now?
Welcome to Global Power Game.
Historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world.
Interestingly, Trump is the same president who launched America's economic war against China by imposing massive trade tariffs, sanctioning Chinese companies, and promising to bring manufacturing power back to the United States.
Thanks, Al. So, if you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to bring, it's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing.
The United States believed it could slow China's rise through tariff, sanctions, chip restrictions, and economic pressure. But over the last decade, something changed, and China became just too important to isolate. The world's second largest economy, the center of global manufacturing, a technological superpower, and one of Iran's most important economic partners. And that matters enormously right now for the United States, because Trump's visit to China is happening at a very unusual moment when the United States remain trapped in the growing conflict with Iran around the Strait of Hormuz, while China maintains deep ties with Tehran despite Trump's continued warning to Beijing against supplying weapons and military technology to Iran. For Trump's administration, the stakes in Iran are no longer just geopolitical, they are economic and political. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most critical oil routes on Earth, and the growing instability there is already putting pressure on global energy markets. Oil markets are under pressure. Fuel prices are rising across America. Inflation fear is building once again. And American consumers are already beginning to feel the impact. At a moment when Trump is moving closer to critical midterm election later this year, which means reopening the Strait of Hormuz is no longer just a foreign policy objective for Trump's administration. It is now becoming an economic and political necessity back at home in Washington, D.C. As tensions continue to rise in the Middle East, the Trump's administration is realizing that military pressure alone may not be enough to stabilize the region or reopen the Strait of Hormuz, because China is one of the few countries with enough influence over Tehran to help push Iran towards a broader ceasefire agreement. China is one of Iran's largest oil buyers, one of its most important economic partners, and one of the few major powers that Tehran still maintains deep strategic ties with. Which means that if Trump wants a pathway towards stabilizing the Strait of Hormuz, he may now need China's influence over Iran itself. And that is likely one of the key agendas of Trump's visit to China. The Strait of Hormuz crisis is only one part of why Trump's visit to China matters so much. Because Trump is also arriving in Beijing with other major economic objectives of his own. During his election campaign, Trump argued that economic relationship between the United States and China unfairly benefited Beijing. He argued that American industries were losing manufacturing power to China, that trade imbalances were hurting American workers, and that China was gaining enormous advantage from access to the US market. The tariffs, sanctions, and the broader economic pressure campaign on China were all designed to force a reset in that relationship. And now, Trump wants this visit to show that Washington is finally gaining that leverage back. But oil and Iran are not the only vulnerabilities exposing America's dependence on China. The Trump administration is expected to push for major Chinese commitments to purchase more American goods and services, particularly in sectors capable of creating visible economic impact inside the United States itself. Agriculture, manufacturing, industrial exports, industries tied directly to American jobs, economic confidence, and President Trump's political momentum back home ahead of the midterm election later this year. The economic importance of this visit is becoming increasingly visible. Reports suggest that major American business leaders tied to companies like Boeing and Tesla are also closely connected to this broader visit. For Boeing, China remains one of the world's most important aviation markets at a time when aircraft trade between both countries has faced growing disruption. And for Tesla, China remains critical not only as a massive consumer market but also as a major pillar of the company's global manufacturing operations. A reminder that despite years of tariffs and economic confrontation, the American and Chinese economies remain deeply interconnected at the industrial level itself. And as a part of this visit, Trump and Xi Jinping are also expected to move towards a renewed United States-China Phase 1 trade agreement aimed at expanding Chinese purchase of American exports. Beyond oil, Iran, and trade, there is another major strategic issue expected to dominate discussions during this summit: rare earth minerals. The American economy, including its Silicon Valley and defense sectors, remains heavily dependent on them. Advanced electronics, electric vehicles, defense systems, semiconductors, and energy infrastructure. China controls a massive portion of the global rare earth supply chain to the United States, especially after Beijing restricted rare earth exports in response to escalating American tariffs and export controls on Chinese goods last year. During the summit, Trump is also expected to push for a broader trade understanding with China aimed at securing a more stable flow of rare earth minerals into the United States. And that exposed a much deeper reality for the United States, that even after years of tariffs and attempts to reduce dependence on China, it still remains deeply tied to critical Chinese supply chains. While Trump arrives in Beijing looking for economic relief, geopolitical stability, and strategic cooperation, China sees this summit very differently. For Beijing, this visit is not just diplomacy, it is a validation. The first US presidential visit to China in nearly 9 years. After years of tariffs, sanctions, technology restrictions, and growing military tensions, an American president is now walking back into Beijing for direct negotiations. And China is likely to present this moment as a proof of something much bigger, a victory, that Beijing's rise could not be stopped through pressure alone. Because despite years of economic confrontation, China did not collapse under tariffs, it did not back down under sanctions, and it did not allow itself to become isolated from the global economy. Meanwhile, this summit is not only being watched in Washington and Beijing, but across the whole Indo-Pacific. And no country may be watching this summit more nervously than Taiwan, because Taipei fears that in exchange for China's cooperations on issues like Iran and global stability, Trump could soften America's position on Taiwan itself, especially regarding arms sales, military support, and Washington's long-standing stand towards Taiwanese independence. Taiwan is worried that improving personal relations between Trump and Xi Jinping could gradually weaken US commitment towards the island. And even small changes in diplomatic language coming out of this summit could send massive signals across the whole Indo-Pacific region. In the end, as Trump's visit to Beijing unfolds, the world will now be watching very carefully for the geopolitical signals that follow on US-Iran ceasefire agreement, talks on Taiwan, on rare earth supply materials chained to the US, and on the future balance between the world's two largest superpowers. Because this summit may not end the rivalry between Washington and Beijing, but it could begin shaping the next phase of it. And in the coming weeks, the real impact of this visit will become much clearer. So stay tuned to the global power game, because in our next video, we will break down the new geopolitical signals, power shifts, and strategic consequences emerging after Trump's China's visit.